Welcome to Gideon's Promise, the podcast. In the landmark 1963 decision Gideon v. Wainwright, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled every person accused of a crime in America must be provided a lawyer, regardless of their ability to pay. This podcast is about the people that uphold that promise, public defenders. These dedicated lawyers give voice to 80% of the people thrown into the system, and yet in the national discussion regarding justice reform, public defenders are largely overlooked. This show centers public defenders in that conversation. We will explore the critical role public defenders play in addressing a wide range of issues facing marginalized communities with subject matter experts, key opinion leaders, and people impacted by the American criminal legal system. Listen as a community of advocates discuss their work to strengthen public defenders and transform public defense. Well, welcome everyone. March is so special to Gideon's Promise for two significant reasons. It is Women's in History Month, and it also marks the month of the anniversary of the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in Gideon v. Wainwright, which is one of the reasons and is the instrumental and foundational case that brought us as an organization together to form Gideon's Promise. We want to use this month's podcast episode to highlight exceptional women who have played an important role igniting change in the criminal legal system. The history of Gideon v. Wainwright is one we hold very close to our hearts at Gideon's Promise for obvious reasons. But the case itself also holds a special place within Women's in History Month. The fight for public defense began long before the case involving Clarence Earl Gideon in 1963. In the early 1900s, and I just learned this, I hate to admit, on Facebook, a female attorney named Clara Shortridge Folks became the first female attorney in the state of California. She is credited with introducing the concept of public defense as a right for all citizens and a right that all citizens should have. In the early 1900s, when women were much less likely to attend higher education institutions, let alone graduate schools such as law school, the few female attorneys practicing were often the last resort for indigent defendants because many clients who could afford to pay lawyers did not want women representing them. Female defense lawyers have and continue to be many of the most influential players in the fight for equal defense in our criminal legal system. Today, we are so lucky to be joined by two women. And once again, Rap, you are always surrounded by dynamic women of color every time we do this podcast. I wonder why.
Let me just say about that, Illy. It's Women's History Month. So although I'm here with you all, I'm going to sit back and just listen to the conversation between these three amazing women. So thanks for the introduction, and I'm out.
So Rap is going to let me take over the whole podcast. I love it. Well, what a way to celebrate Women's in History Month. So as I started, I said that to introduce, there are two women who have achieved enormous success and perseverance in the fight for equal justice. We welcome Keisha Hudson, who has spent nearly 18 years as a public defender. And I'm gonna tell you why that's telling my age as well when I tell you how I know Ms. Hudson. But Keisha Hudson, who spent nearly 18 years as a public defender, first with the Defender Association of Philadelphia, then as a capital appellate defender with the Federal Defender Eastern District of Pennsylvania, their capital habeas unit, and then where she represented people on death row in their state post-conviction matters. Now, Keisha is the director of the Defender Association of Philadelphia, where she began in that role at the start of this year. Welcome, Keisha.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So let me just tell you one other known, I'm gonna call it the little known Black history fact while we have Keisha here. I'm so happy that Keisha's here because it comes full circle. So for you listeners who didn't know, and I bet you most of you didn't, so just so you know, Keisha and I have been friends for a very long time. Keisha and I went to undergraduate school together. We were alums of Cornell University, where we were I think one of two only Black city and regional planning majors in our school. Keisha has been my friend. She has been the protesting friend. We've protested together. We've done sit-ins together for women's rights, LGBTQ rights, people of color, anything that we could protest together at Cornell, we were doing. And at the time had no idea that 20 plus years, there would be a 20 plus year gap that our lives would then come back together again in this space. And she would be leading one of the largest offices in the country, and public defender offices in the country. And I would be leading a big national organization that trains public defenders. So Keisha, this has been a long time coming.
I'm so glad that you mentioned our history, because I was going to get into it. I won't divulge all our secrets, but we had quite a journey at Cornell, and I think often about how I met you, and just the work we did together. And we didn't know that we would end up in the same space, but really should have, given really how we moved through undergrad at Cornell, and protested every ism.
Every ism.
You protested.
And we're still in our work, still kind of protesting
Still
in a different way.
A different
Because we're too old to sit down on the concrete these days, right?
No, not sitting down on the concrete. No.
Also, well, Keisha, it's so great to have you.
So great to be here.
And so also joining us is another person who is near and dear to my heart. And I'm going to share you a little bit about Miss Alaina Bloodworth. Alaina was a former public defender and director of students at the Baton Rouge Public Defender Office in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where she has practiced client-centered, zealous representation for the past several years. Alaina was very instrumental in trying to build the community-based organization partnership with the Public Defender Office where she worked. Alaina recently has now been appointed to a new position. I'm telling you, and Alaina, I know you're a grown woman, but I consider you one of my babies, because not only is Alaina an alum of the Gideon's Promise program, she has taken her talents and skills and brought it to a national program. She has the newly appointed Deputy Director of the Black Public Defender Association, also known as BPDA. And I am so excited that she is running some amazing programs, which I hope to get to see in a couple of weeks in Washington, D.C. So Alaina, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. I mean, I think it's just an honor. I remember being at Gideon's Promise and looking at you and Rap and all of these amazing people. So for me to be actually in the number right now, I appreciate you all. You all poured into me, so I am happy to be here.
Well, these are two dynamic women that I'm so excited I get to celebrate Women's in History Month, and have fought alongside Gideon's Promise for many, many years. And we're so grateful to have them today. So I'm gonna just get right into it. So Keisha, Alaina, the whole point of this is just to have a conversation. Feel free to jump in if there's something that you really want to share with our audience. But this is our opportunity. This is our now to celebrate, right? It's National Lawyers Month. It's the Gideon anniversary, the 59th anniversary of the Gideon decision. It's Gideon's Promise 15th anniversary as an institution. It's a lot to celebrate. And so I'm gonna get right into it. So you all have had notable success to date, right? But you didn't get there by yourselves, right? You didn't get there alone. Can you share, and I'll start with you, Alaina, a notable female mentor that you had that helped contribute to your success today?
Yeah, I could tell you, of course, this month is extremely important because I could tell you in law school, my mentor, I didn't have a mentor that existed in public defense, right? I went to Southern University Law Center. We didn't have like a public interest society or anything else. I could tell you that actually went to law school. I thought I wanted to do public policy and education, right? I was a former teacher. I taught at a school with like a really low, most of the students came from a low socioeconomic status, right? Most of my students were Black and they were poor and they didn't have anything. Let me just be very real. It was actually, I went to law school, thought I wanted to do public policy because I said, oh, I'm going to be able to affect the larger community. And no, of course, this to anybody in public policy, we need those people who, will continue their fight there. But for me, I really wanted to touch the actual population, right? Like for me, that was important. I couldn't sit at a desk all day. So, of course, I saw this email and was like, oh, public defender's office. And I was like, okay, let me apply. And it was that internship, to be honest, that turned it around for me, right? And then once I got to the internship, I loved it. They hired me on. And then it was Gideon's Promise, right? That helped me even make the connection of why I love this work so much because I wanted to demand, right? Different services for my clients that I couldn't demand for my students, right? So that was extremely important to me. And it was women like Heather Pickney, April Kamara, that surrounded me, right? That I have now the privilege to work with, that really helped me get through, right? How to figure out how to do balance, right? Which is extremely important, but also how to be able to excel in this career. And I will say there was also another woman, her name is Sarah Anderson. Hopefully she'll listen to this podcast. I mean, she wrapped me up in her arms, taught me how to cross-examine and all of these different things before I even got to the Gideon's Promise training. So, I guess if I want to name three people, right, like Heather Pickney, even to see a black woman train, right, that was something I had not seen in law school. April Kamara, a woman who came from Memphis, working in public defense, who now is president and CEO of NLADA. So, I guess if to name those three mentors, I'm extremely grateful for them because I would not be here if it wasn't for them.
Wow. And it just to show you, those women are now in leadership positions in some of the, best criminal legal organizations in the country, and representation matters. What about you, Keisha? Who notable female mentor that you can think of?
This is an easy one. So her name is Sherry Lynn Johnson. She is a professor of law at Cornell Law School and the co-director of the Cornell Death Penalty Project. And Sherry, who is white and from Minnesota, advocated for me before she even met me. She was sitting on the admissions committee for Cornell Law School. My LSAT scores, we're having a conversation right now, unfortunately, about LSAT scores and the nominee for US Supreme Court Justice, which is a ludicrous conversation. But my LSAT scores were not great. And I applied to Cornell Law School. And after I got in, came to find out that she, who was sitting on the committee, advocated for me to get in. She saw something in my application, in my essay, and she sought me out. I had the pleasure of having her for constitutional law my first semester. And from the time I got there, she was a mentor and a guide for me because I knew she did death penalty work, because I knew she ran the clinic. I wanted to work in the clinic and had the opportunity to do that my second year of law school. But before even meeting me, right, I don't know that I would have gotten into Cornell Law School. What that experience would have liked, being able to do the death penalty clinic, being able to work with clients who are on death row in South Carolina, being able to really see the critical work of public defense, but on the appellate side and in the capital context, really was the start of my journey. Still didn't know that I would be a public defender, but that guide and that mentorship was just so critical. And she is just a phenomenal advocate. Recently won the US Supreme Court case in Curtis Flowers, and we are all aware of that case. So she argued and won that case before the United Supreme Court. And there's a lot of scholarship around race and the death penalty. So just someone who is and has always been really supportive of me and guided me, but also, behind me every step of the way, and was the person who told me to apply for this position, and that I really needed to put myself out there, and that I would shine in this role, and that it was critical that I take on this role. So still guiding me even today.
Well, I love that. I mean, I just love just women empowering other women to do and be bold and take a leap of faith in some instances. So you both of you mentioned, right, law school, right? Alaina, through your work, Gideon's Promise is now partnering with Southern University Law Center to all their law clerks. We're working in the law clerk program to introduce those young law clerk minds to public defense, right? Cornell Law School is one of our law school partners to bring in recent grads through our law school partnership project. So your presence in both of those institutions bring us together. It's just so the synergy is just so crazy. Now, as I'm saying this out loud, I keep forgetting how connected we truly are. Can you talk a little bit about just the representation of women in law school, right? So, do you see a trend? Is it changing from the time that you both were in law school? Like talk to me about, and I'll start with you, Keisha, about what you saw in law school, your days there, and what you're seeing now coming out of law school, these lawyers coming to you.
Well, Illy, the diversity at Cornell Law School was much like the diversity at Cornell University, which was little. I was just one of a few Black people, Black women in the law school class. And when I looked at who was on the faculty and who were in positions of leadership and who was dean and assistant dean, women were completely underrepresented, and certainly a complete lack of diversity, and being in positions of influence and power. That is changing. We still have a ways to go. Yeah, I've spent the last year and year and a half at teaching at Temple Law School, and I will say more women are coming into law school. Right, they're vastly now outnumbering men who are coming into law school. I've seen and more women actually coming into public interest and coming into public defense. 60% of our last classes have been women, women defenders. So I sense a change. What I am not seeing still, when we look at who's leading law schools now, more Black women now leading law schools than there have ever been. I was just reading an article about 3 new deans, Black female deans of law schools, but we have a really far way to go. I'm encouraged by the number of women coming into the profession, not so many women taking on leadership roles, and a bigger discussion really around just equity for women in mentorship, in training, in support, and in providing ways for them to advance and take on these critical roles.
So I'm going to pose this question to you, Alaina, and I'm going to, based on what Keisha said, do you think the legal profession has changed? So we talk about what Keisha's saying, there's a bump, but then once people has it changed for women in the past decade?
I probably would echo a little bit more of what Keisha said. I do feel that more women are coming through, right? I can tell you that a lot more Black women are coming through, because I remember being the person who interviewed students, right? And I think a big pull of the reason why I was able to have so much success at the Baton Rouge Office of Public Defender was a lot of those Black women that were coming through, because by far we had more Black women now starting to be the majority of the class. They saw a lot of themselves in me, right? I was a representation of what they wanted to be. So, and that was great, because that relationship started very easily, even from, is it okay if I wear my hair natural, right? In the courtroom, and these little questions that they weren't comfortable asking a male, or they weren't comfortable, even a Black male, right? In general, do I believe that more Black women are coming and more women are coming into this field? Yes. Do I see, we just talked about a lot of Black women leading national organizations in public defense? Yes. Do I feel like we have still a long way to go? Of course, right? Because the majority, if you look across this country, this is still a male dominated profession, right? We still are a certain small percentage, but I am hopeful that I hope that we can be able to increase those numbers, especially, across this country.
So let's take it to public defense, right? Because I asked about the legal profession as a whole. So let's talk about public defender, just the public defense community. Do you feel like the challenges, you face as a public defender have been magnified because you're also a woman in the profession? where implicit bias, or some people call unconscious bias, may play a role inside the courtroom? And I ask this question because, in the beginning, when we first started this organization, we were like, a public defender is a public defender. Women, men, whatever, we're public defenders and we're training you as such. Then our lawyers started to have some challenges based on who they are. And we started to incorporate women in public defense. So my question and really being tuned to some of the challenges women who are public defenders may have, I would say in the courtroom and outside of the courtroom. And so my question is, have they been magnified? The challenges of being a public defender, number one, is hard enough. But because you are a woman, have they been magnified? And Alaina, I'll start with you.
So, in my opinion, yes, I can only base it off my own experience, right, as a woman. And then I also have to add being a Black woman, right? I don't know how many times I've gone into the courthouse, maybe a courthouse that I'm unfamiliar with. Sometimes, like I was a public defender in district court, I would go into city court and they would ask for my bar roll number before I could even enter through the building. You didn't ask my counterpart, right, for his bar roll number. I mean, little things like that, right? Because I couldn't have my phone and they thought that I was clearly a client coming through, right? Whereas lawyers could have their phones. Those little things, they affect you, right? But you still have to go in and represent your client, and still have to push through those moments. I could tell you also, and I don't know if I'm correct in saying the statistic, but most judges I could say here in Louisiana are white males, right? So that also is a challenge, because even as a woman, even little things like I just had a baby, guess what? I'm nursing, right? So I can't every 3, 4 hours, I have to figure some things out, right? I can't be in trial for 8, 9 hours a day, right? So there are just little things of that sort with our male counterparts, I think, are hard. So I could tell you that, yes, I believe it is 100% magnified because also as jurors, right, if you're in trial, when I think they picture a lawyer, they picture a white male. It is what it is, right? So that's already hard enough. And then you also have to get them to have empathy for your client, right, who is Black. So of course you have to push through what they think of you, right, because you are a representation of your client. They connect you all, but then you also have to push through of how they're looking at your client. So, it's little things like that. I think that we're coming away, but we still have a long way to go.
And Keisha, what are some of the things you've seen, in women public defenders and challenges?
I'll tell you a personal story, and Illy, you remember way back in the day, I used to have mini dreadlocks,
Yep.
and working in, public defense, working especially doing capital appellate work. I will echo what Alaina says. It's still very much a very white, very male space, and no one ever said this to me. But when I had my hair, in little dreadlocks, right, I just felt, right, that I was being seen differently. And it became much more palpable when I would be in courtrooms in Philadelphia and throughout, middle Pennsylvania, where a lot of my capital cases, were from, feeling overlooked, feeling talked down to, watching the judge's reaction when my white colleagues sitting next to me at counsel table would perk up or pay more attention or lean forward, and feeling very dismissed in that space. No one ever told me, or asked me to cut my hair, but I made that decision and I regret it to this day, right? I made the decision that I would be perceived and be taken much more seriously and perceived as more effective at, for my clients. And I also wanted my colleagues and the judges to look at me a different way, a professional, right? And I'm now a professional. And so I internalized, how other people's implicit and unconscious bias impacted me and made a personal decision, right, to alter my appearance so that I would appear more professional and be taken more seriously. And I hear that constantly now from the Black female attorneys that I work with or at the Defenders Association. It is very hard to be taken seriously, and they are overlooked or they're thought to be, the client, or when they walk into the courtroom, it is, are you the defendant? I hear those stories weekly. And I tell this personal story to say, don't alter, change, adapt who you are. Black beauty is important. Black hair is sacred. Walk through the space confidently who you are and represent your clients confidently in who you are.
So my follow-up question to you is going to be, Keisha, like, how did you overcome the challenges? So it sounds to me, you internalized it, but your gift to every woman public defender, and especially Black women, was to stay who you are. So you couldn't do it, but you decided to empower and give that power back to them.
Right. Exactly.
That's
Like, it's so important for every defender, and when I say defender, I mean everyone, including the administrative staff, right, to know that I have their backs, right? I want them to walk into a courthouse, walk into a prison, any space, knowing that their chief public defender supports them. And so it's not enough to say it, that I'm here, that I support you, but I'm going to advocate for you. And if I hear any commentary or remark, I want to know if that courtroom staff called you the defendant. I want to hear about these experiences, because I'm going to elevate them, and I'm going to raise them when I talk to judges and I talk to the courts, to say, you really need to address this. This bias, impacts not only the individual who experienced it, but how are you perceiving our clients, and how is that impacting the decisions you're making on our clients' behalf? That is a huge concern. So now everybody's doing an implicit bias training. I think that's a positive step in the direction, but it still plays such a huge role in how judges, prosecutors, public defenders, right, how we represent our clients. And we have a lot more work to do.
Yeah, and so for you, Alaina, Keisha's been practicing in the state of Pennsylvania, in major metro Philly, right? Big, they won the Super Bowl. It's a big city, right? And she's experienced Keisha and her attorneys, and her women attorneys especially, are facing these challenges. You are similarly situated, as you were practicing in Louisiana, right? Which is, completely different culture and dynamic. And for you, and how did, you're part of the Gideon's Promise community. And so, although we hope Keisha's team will be we're this close, yes, to be part of the Gideon's Promise, her office as well, community. But how did Gideon's Promise help you overcome some of the challenges you mentioned earlier when I asked that question?
To be honest, the mentors, right? I mean, I can name a Shantae Parker, I could name a Aisha, I could name a Heather Pickney, Lori Towns, right? Like all of these people that I was in community with, right? Going to these Gideon's Promise events, right? Or gathering every 6 months, for me to be able to really have those conversations and get in depth and realize, I think I was called at one point by RAP a new generation public defender, right? The ones who basically want to set everything on fire, right? I set those courtrooms on fire, right? I was, if they wanted to say, oh, I'll never forget that when I needed to push a trial back, because I don't know, I was almost 9 months pregnant, right? And I didn't want to be giving birth in the middle of trial. And, he told me that, I remember this judge telling me, well, I mean, it's still 2 weeks prior before your due date, right? And I was like, okay, so you want to know what? Try me, right? So I explained to them that if you end up, being able to set this trial date, right, I'm going to put on record all of the issues and all of the problems, and then I am going to file that writ and I'm going to send it up, to the second. But it's little things like that, like that's insanity. Why should I have to do that, right? But it's those people that I could go back and they're like right on and really, encourage it, right? And not only and be able to even have a moment to cry about it or whatever the case may be. It provided a community that I felt safe, if I felt encouraged, and I felt inspired.
Hey, Keisha, can you tell our audience, and you mentioned about, knowing RAP before Gideon's Promise even existed, number one, and then, coming from Montgomery County Public Defender Office with Dean Beer, where that's where our formal partnership started, right, with Gideon's Promise. So you've been part of GP for a long time. Can you, just tell us a little bit, number one, about how your relationship with this organization helped you build the Montgomery County office, and now help you, transform the Philly office?
So when Dean and I came to Montgomery County, Dean had been there, and when he talked to me about the position, the reason I left the federal defenders and took a $30,000 pay cut was because he painted a vision for me of partnership, right? It wasn't, I'm the defender and you're the deputy, and there's going to be hierarchy and division in roles, and I will, manage down, and you will execute, what I tell you to execute, right? It was very much, I wanted partner. And, we knew early on that the public defender office there, due to incredible underfunding, right? Incredible lack of resources and staffing, that we needed to really focus inwards, and recruit and train the best public defenders that we could. And in our tenure there, we brought in over half the staff, we directly hired. Public defense is incredibly challenging. And I think what is so beautiful and brilliant about what Gideon's Promise does, and why we wanted to have that partnership, is because it is really hard, challenging work. And I think, the way that you train, the way that you mentor, the way that you support public defenders in being able to stay as a public defender and thrive and be able to do their best, most effective work, that's what Gideon's Promise does. And so, it was important to build that community. And, everyone that we sent to the Gideon's Promise Core 101 training, would come back so inspired. But then, as we sent more attorneys to the training, there was now a community of attorneys in Montgomery County who had been through the program, had learned about really how to be an effective public defender. Were so inspired, right? I just kept hearing the word inspirational. I kept hearing, I cried. I don't know how they did it, but they made me cry. And would come back so energized about the work, and equipped with the skills to be just so much better in the courtroom than I think they even knew they were capable of. So I think training, mentorship, is really, it's not given enough credit when it comes to, well, how do we retain and build strong public defenders and strong public defense systems. I think it's crucial, and it's a model that has worked in Montgomery County and will work here in Philadelphia.
And then also a little bit about the history of what happened in Montgomery County with the amicus, because I think we know, but I don't think our listeners know.
So Dean and I were fired. We were fired because we filed an amicus brief in the ACLU's bail litigation in Philadelphia. And when I said earlier about always being guided by our deals and thinking about our clients, we knew we had to file that brief because it was painting a picture of what bail was like in Montgomery County, and it's atrocious there in terms of people being held for long periods of time on low-level cases. $50,000 on a retail theft for someone who's never been arrested in their life.
Did you say $50,000?
$50,000, right?
Wow.
And then you sit in jail pre-trial because you cannot afford that. And so we knew that raising these issues would bring to the forefront why bail reform and pretrial reform is so critical in that area. But the public defender office is also not independent. We're part of a county structure. And so the silver lining from this termination, there are a couple. One, right, we elevated the issues on bail for our clients. We also elevated why public defender offices need to be not only independent, but well-funded and well-resourced. And it was through our termination that really brought to light those issues in a broader way in Pennsylvania.
Wow, Keisha, I love speaking with you because number one, you inspire me because you just had a terrible thing happen, right? To be terminated from position when you have a family to take care of.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mom, for paying the mortgage that month. March 2020 mortgage. Thank you, Mama.
So for basically doing what you're doing your job, and you said, and I want our listeners here, she said, the silver lining in all this is that it amplified the challenges that were happening in that county. And then, so I just wanted to put that out that public defenders are a different breed. They are a different breed of lawyer. When we find, because we get kicked, and I designated myself a public defender a long time ago, right? But when we get kicked in the teeth and our clients get kicked in the teeth, we still find a silver lining any way we can amplify what's happening in this criminal legal system. So yeah, well, I love the phrase that Rap came up with, next generation, new generation public defender, because I think that is the whole purpose of Gideon's Promise. But I have to say, Keisha and I are kind of on the old school generation. So I think Keisha was still doing that and standing up in the days when she was at the Montgomery County Public Defender Office in Pennsylvania with Dean Beer, who was her chief when she was deputy, right, at the time. And they've been a long time partner with us as well. And so, and I appreciate you all sharing that with our listeners, especially our women listeners, who often came with a lot of the challenges that you mentioned and how to solve them. And our organization that said we need to find representation in people's experience to guide them through that process. So I'm going to switch a little bit and ask you this question, which I don't know if you get from the law students that you all work with on a regular basis, but what is something, and Alaina, I'll go to you first. What is something you feel you are most proud of in your career?
Probably the relationship that I built with the community, right? I'm really proud of, I know I did Christmas bailouts, right? That ended up hitting national news, and really being able to not only build those relationships, to be able to use it, to be able to be powerful, right, for the community. And if I have to say my most proud moment probably was being able to like stand up in front of City Hall, which like the DA's office is right upstairs, and like demand for charges to be dismissed, right? With community partners standing with me, right? And not only demanding it, but actually being successful. As much as I love litigating, as much as I love trial work, and all of that is extremely important, what's also equally important and also just as powerful, if not more, is to be able to have those community relationships because we had, and not to get into the weeds of things, a narcotics unit down here that was specifically targeting the Black community, right? Pulling people over without probable cause, planting evidence on our clients, right? And it was a full admission of those things. And for a while, the community was quiet because they were saying, we've said these things for years and no one has acted. Well, I acted, right? And I had a community actually standing with me to say, hey, if you're going to push, right, we'll push with you, right? And if it wasn't for that push, those cases wouldn't have dismissed. That narcotics unit would not have been dismantled, right? But it took, a real push. And it also, I'm just so grateful that and feel so honored that, they trusted me enough to be able to stand with me and that we had success because of it.
What about you, Keisha?
I'm going to go back to being the original Gideon's Promise person before John even probably knew there was going to be a Gideon's Promise. So I would be remiss in not mentioning that John is the reason I am a public defender. Working for John when he was director of training, I was his law clerk, and seeing an incredible model for what an advocate, what a public defender is, how a public defender represents their clients, how they talk to their clients, that passion to the work, the push I needed, right, to steer me in this direction. And I never looked back. And, that summer changed my life in so many ways. And I think what I'm most proud of is moving through my entire career, never really compromising those ideals. And so, filing the amicus brief in Montgomery County was hard. I had an idea that the outcome would be the outcome, but not letting that fear drive what should always drive a public defender, right? What's the best interest of my client, right? Am I working to advance and advocate what is really best for my clients and our client population as a whole, and never really compromising in terms of how I'm going to advocate for and push for either change on an individual client's case or for change in the system. I think it started, at PDS, and think it started, with working with RAP, and again, that, maintain focus to your ideals and really what do we mean when we say client-centered, and that if that drives everything you do, then you can move pretty boldly, in the public defense space, and you can achieve and advance, reform. And so I think, not one moment, but just really, that has really been my guide in really informing what I do and holding firm to what I believe in and advocating loudly and very proudly for reform and change.
Thank you for sharing that, Keisha, with our listeners. So my last and final question is about the future for women in law, right? The future of young women who are thinking about entering this field. And I want to make sure my listeners, my male listeners I'm never a firm believer of the men versus women. I think it's men and women in partnership to elevate women in this profession, to support women that are coming into this profession or are in the profession. And so my question, Alaina, to you is, what advice would you offer young women who want to enter the field of law? And then the same to you, Keisha.
That is hard, right? Let me just say that, right? I never believe in giving you a lot of fluff, right? It's hard, man. It is hard. And it's even harder as you go through life, right? And you hit these different steps in your life, from getting married and becoming a mother and all of these different things, right? Because you are still expected to be that same person you was working, I think, in public defense. We have our offices, and we're so overloaded, right? And I think it's so easy to become just this workaholic, right? And that's just not good for you. It's not good for your clients. It's not good for your families. It's not good, and you will burn out in this field. So I believe probably my advice would be, take it one day at a time, take it one step at a time. Yes, it will be hard, but it will be 100% worth it, especially if you decide to become a public defender.
Mhm.
Keisha?
I would say find a mentor, several mentors, right? And so, I still have mentors from law school, right? Sherry Johnson is still a strong mentor of mine. Rap is a mentor of mine. It is, the work motivates me, and the work is what keeps me, as a public defender. But it is really, as Alaina says, it's so hard and it's so challenging. And there have been several moments in my life, particularly after Montgomery County, when I thought, maybe I need to go on a separate path and a separate track. And it was my mentors that continued to inspire me and brought me back to, and so I am so happy to be back in as a public defender. But mentorship is so critical. It's the mentors that got you into the space or inspired you to get into the space and be a public defender that are going to really keep you in the work.
So, Rap, before I close out, you've been listening these last 40 minutes, listening to these dynamic women, and I just want to get your thoughts and anything you care to share as you've been quietly taking a step back and just be an observer of all this women magic. Something you want to share with our listeners?
Yes, no, I just, not with the listeners, but really with Keisha and Alaina. I just want to say thank you, because I've been sitting here. I've had a front row seat for this podcast, and I'm beaming because I live in a household run by Black women. We have an organization. Our leadership team is largely run by Black women. Of our 7 members of our leadership team, 5 of them are Black women. And I just love that to be in this space with the 3 of you who really are Black women leading the charge of public defense. I mean, last month, Black History Month, we talked about how 4 national organizations, Gideon's Promise, NLADA, NACDL, NAPD, all public defender organizations being led by Black women. Keisha, you are leading one of the largest public defender organizations in the nation. As a Black woman, Alaina, you are the deputy director of the Black Public Defender Association. So I just want to say thanks and just say that you all left me very optimistic. And Illy, thank you for giving me 2 minutes to chime in this podcast, but I also just loved hearing you moderate the entire podcast. So I'm out.
So, in true former fashion, and because Rap is out, I'd like to thank you, Keisha Hudson, the director of the Defender Association of Philadelphia, and Alaina Bloodworth, the deputy director of the Black Public Defender Association, for joining us this month to celebrate Women's in History Month, the Gideon V. Wainwright decision, and for me, most importantly, the 15th anniversary of Gideon's Promise. And true former fashion, I will be my government name. This is Ilham Askia wrapping it up.
Hey, Il, before we hit that outro, why don't you tell people how to order a copy of the book in your radio voice?
In my radio voice?
Yeah, in your radio voice.
Okay. Get your copy of Gideon's Promise, a public defender movement to transform criminal justice at Amazon, IndieBound, Beacon Press, or wherever books are sold. Pre-order today, and a portion of proceeds will help us support public defenders.
Oh, that was good. That was good.
Thank you for listening to Gideon's Promise, the podcast. For more information on the topics covered and featured guests, please visit our website at gideonspromise.org. And finally, please subscribe, share, and let us know what you think.